previous video, we covered a bit about UI router, its advantages, and how to configure basic states or routes using UI router. In this video, we are going to see on how to work with UI router parameters in various ways. So what are all the various ways we can really send parameters to our application whenever we are working with UI router? The first thing is that we can have something to set up as part of the routing URL itself. So which means you can send some kind of parameter values as part of the URL itself, or you can also use ui-sref in order to send few of the values as part of your UI router configuration. That is the state configuration. The next way is just use only ui-sref, but those particular parameters or values will not be available through URL. So which means even though you send the values through URL, those would not be recognized. But if and only if you send through ui-sref, those are going to be working. The next way is actually using query parameters, and this is pretty straightforward way. Like we are going to have a question mark, ampersand, and so on, where we can send key and value related sets as part of your query string, and that too as part of your routing URL. So this is just another way as well. So we typically do either routing URL or query parameters, but on top of it, if your particular application really demands on not having routing URL but just only work with ui-sref, still there are chances to work with that one too. Okay, what are the various features supported in order to have those parameters or values to be sent? First of all, either you use routing URL way or ui-sref or query parameters or whatever, those parameters can be marked optional. So which means you have the flexibility of either sending the value or not sending the value at all for the respective parameter. And default values. So if those parameters are already configured but the user did not provide any value, or your application did not provide any value for the respective parameter in your URL or query parameter, there could be situations where those need to be automatically falling back to some default values. If such is the case, you can still configure your state to actually work with default values as well, in case if those particular parameter values are not really sent as part of your URL or your query parameters or ui-sref. Regular expression support. So there is a special syntax if you really wanted to work with regular expression support. So which means those parameter related values can be automatically sent based on your parameter names which actually go with regular expressions. So we are going to see these examples pretty soon. ui-sref support. So this is pretty important, as because every UI router related state or the configuration in one way or another directly or indirectly supports the URL configuration with ui-sref or not just href. So if you are not familiar with the ui-sref, you might want to check my previous video. Array support. So you can have your router parameters to be actually having all the values to be taken into one single variable in the form of an array. So you can have one array accepting multiple values of parameters which can be reused later as part of your controller or scope. Squashing. So this is a bit of a confusing subject, but in simple, you can just say how to represent your current value in the URL if it is the same as the default value. So I'm not going to touch more on this one, but we are going to see this concept as part of our conceptual demonstration. And there's one more concept called state parameters, that is $state parameters. So why do we need it and how do we use it? First of all, it comes with the UI router module. So which means if you included UI router related JavaScript in your application, we are already having $state parameters readily available for consumption. That is the easiest way to actually access your parameters or parameter values, whatever you configured as part of your state in your application. So which means if your application tries to switch to a different state and that state involves a particular route with various parameters and values, you can literally get hold of all of those parameters and values in your application or in your code using $state parameters. And as I mentioned, this $state parameters is usually used in controller or scope or service related code. And state parameters needs to be injected. So which means if you are working with, or if you would like to work with state parameters or $state params, that needs to be injected as part of your controller or service. So let us jump onto a couple of examples here. So I have a simple example already. So this is just a home page. You can see if I am on home, it just says you are at root, click something else or some link or whatever. So in this case, I have two links which are actually saying the same concept, like MSG1, MSG1. So both actually go to the same URL if you think so. So if I click on this, you can see it actually goes to first message, which actually brings some message for that particular template. And it actually binds to A and B, which are actually configured as part of your scope 10 and 20. Similarly, there exists one more link which also works in the same fashion as the previous one. So the only difference between these two is how we are actually trying to get the route. So this is using the route URL using href, and this is using the state specification as part of ui-sref. So if I switch back to my code, you can see this is the first link which actually specifies hash first message, and this is the second one which actually goes with the state name being called in the form of a function. So how did I configure these two? So if you go back to my JavaScript here, you can see this is the route, whatever I am specifying right here, in the form of href. But if you would like to work with first message, which is nothing but the name of the state, then you are going to work with ui-sref. So this is a typical way on how you can really work with states or routes using href or ui-sref. But our goal in this video is really working with parameters. So we did not configure any routing parameters here. So let us add a couple more parameters here. So in this case, I am saying that I would like to have two values to be sent and needs to be automatically stored in the form of A and B. So whenever you would like to have any kind of parameters to be sent, those particular parameters or names need to be preceded with colon. So which says that if I write something like /first message /10/20, 10 will be stored in A and 20 will be stored in B respectively. And we can always get that information or get those variables related information using $state parameters as I mentioned earlier. So in the previous case, we are actually hard coding the values 10 and 20 to A and B, and those are automatically displayed in this fashion. But now I would like to jump away from this hard coding, but instead get those values straight from the route URL and assign to A and B, and finally get directly as part of our template, which actually displays the values of A and B automatically from the scope itself. So in order to accomplish that, the first thing is that I need to inject $state parameters. So I am going to say $state parameters, and I would like to use the same name as part of the function as well. And instead of using 10 here, I am going to say please go to the parameters of the current route and have the value available in A to be accessed, and get that value out and assign to a local variable A, which is going to be stored as part of scope. So you can say this name A should match with this A. So which means whatever the value you provide for this A is going to be retrieved from state parameters and finally assigned to any scope related variable. So similarly, just like A, I am going to get B as well. So if you have more number of parameters here or more parameters here, you are going to access all those parameter names here in order to get the values out, and you can assign to scope and use it in your templates. So just save this, and I need to modify my routing URL as part of my href here. So in order to get through href, I need to send some values as part of the routing parameters. So in this case, I am going to say something like 20 and 30. So which means this 20 will be automatically assigned to A, and that A is going to be retrieved through state parameters, finally assigned to the scope. Similarly, 30 is going to be stored in B, accessible through state parameters, assigned to B. So let us see if this is working fine. So I'm not going to work with this one yet. So I'm going to just comment on this one. I go back here, go to home, just refresh this. and you can see message 1 right here. So let me clear everything. So the moment I click on message 1, and now you can see I have 20 and 30 which are automatically displayed here. So you can also say something like 40 and 50, and it is smart enough to actually figure out that it has to display 40 and 50 using the template. So you can provide any values here, and it is going to take those two values right as part of A and B. So this is pretty much the way on how you can use href. But let us consider about ui-sref. So this is also important. And as part of ui-sref, this particular first message is the name of this particular state name. We need to send some kind of information to this state saying that you are actually sending the values of A and B. So you can send all the parameters in the form of one single JSON object to this state name using the state name method. So you're already using the state name in the form of a method. The only difference now is that you should be able to send all the parameter names and values in the form of one single JSON object. So I'm going to create a new JSON object here, and I would like to send those both values 20 and 30 in the form of A and B parameter names, and that is exactly what I'm going to accomplish here. So the first one is A and the second one is B. So you can see this is just a JSON object which will be sent to this state name and will be executed in the form of a function. So now I go back here, go home, refresh this, and now you can see I have the second link, and if I click on that, you can see it automatically knows that this particular ui-sref needs to be transformed to this routing URL. So let us quickly go to this inspect and see what's going on. You can see even though the ui-sref really says that first message A and B and so on, it has automatically added a href attribute, and it has been done by AngularJS framework automatically. If you go back to my code here, you can see there is no href attribute here, but AngularJS, whenever it has compiled and trying to render, it has added href automatically to our anchor tag based on the translation whatever it could do from our ui-sref expression into new href related routing URL, which will be finally used as part of your browser related URL. So that is pretty much how you can accomplish the simple parameters on how you can do. I can also do just in another way. Instead of using colon here, I can also use braces. So even this is valid. So I can use either of these two ways. So even this should work with no issues. So I go home, I just press Ctrl F5 and open this, and it should still work with no issues in both of those scenarios. So this is just another syntax. Okay, now I would like to have some kind of regular expressions to be provided. So let me start with a new state. So I'm going to call this one a second message. And now I'm going to say, so let me remove this one. So I'm going to say this A can have any kind of value in the form of digits. So I'm going to say something like 0 to 9 and probably plus. So that is nothing but, hold on. So now A can have any kind of value in the form of digits, and B is just normal B. So there is no validation or no regular expression here. So here I'm saying that expression whatever you provide here has to be matched for A in order to take that one into the account. And this kind of syntax is available if and only if you are using braces as part of your parameter names. Okay, so let us see on how I can test this. So I go back here, and in this case I'm going to use second message. So that is the name. So let me see if I modified this. So I did not. I need to modify this one to second message, and now I'm going to provide something like 200 and 300, and I'm going to call this one as message 2. And I also would like to have another ui-sref way of accomplishing the same thing, and let us make sure that I'm using the same name as of the state name, and I need to provide the values. So in this case, I also would like to provide something like 200 and 300, and I would like to call this one as message 2. So I go in here, I click on this, I click refresh. So now I have message 1 and message 2, and the moment I click on this, you can see it has automatically received 200 and 300, and it should work in the same fashion even for the second one. So let me go home, refresh this, and I click on this, and it is going to work even with ui-sref as well. Okay, now I go back here. Let us modify this a bit. The a value is something like demo. So let us see what's going on. So I go back here and I go home and refresh this. Now I click on this, and now you can see whenever I say demo and 300, it says no route available, because whatever the value you provided is not really being matched as part of your regular expression. So I'm not providing any digits here which could be taken into the account for a. So this value, whatever you provided as part of the parameter, did not match with your regular expression, which is actually expecting only the digits. So this route is valid if and only if this expression is also valid or matched. In this case, our particular route did not match with this one, and thus this route itself is not found, and it actually falls back to our particular state which says no route available. So that kind of support is available whenever you would like to have some kind of matching or validating your particular parameter values to be configured as part of your state. Okay, so let us see on how I can support optional values. So let me create a new state, and this one I'm going to call as third message, and as part of the third message, so just a. So whenever I say just a, the most important thing I have to explain here is that it is optional by default. So unlike ng route, you don't need to specify any special character here to make it optional. So whatever the specification you provide as part of your URL parameter is actually optional by default. But it doesn't need to be optional whenever you provide something like this. Now I can say b parameter or parameter b is optional but not a. So which means if you provide a, then only b becomes optional. So if you don't provide a and provide only for b, then that value actually goes back to a. So that is pretty important. Okay, so let me take this one off. I just wanted to make sure that only a is made available, and this is considered third message, which is fine. So I go back here, and for the third message I need to create one more link. So I'm going to call this one as third message, and in this case I'm going to say the third message with no values at all. So I just remove everything here and message 3 here as well, and I go in here and create the same thing similar to our previous ui-sref, and in this case I'm going to call this one as third message. And in this third message, yes, I do not want to send any values, I just send null, so which means literally no object or say no parameter values. So that is an explicit way of saying that I'm not going to send any parameter values for this state. That is the explicit way of sending it. Okay, so let me say this one as message 3 with no parameters, so that we'll have a better understanding on how we are having those links. So message 3 with no parameters, and this is also message 3 with no parameters. So I go back here, go home, refresh this. Now I click on this one, and you can see this is first message template, and no values of a and b are available. And at the same time, if I click on this, it should also give the same kind of result. So I go back here, and you can see there's no result for this one too. And now let us try to provide some kind of value to this one. So I'm going to say something like 10, and I'm going to say it is just one parameter for now. And similarly, I would like to create one more ui-sref by sending the value for a in the form of 10. And at the same time, let us be more specific, saying that I am not going to send any value for b at all. So which means b is going to be null. However, a is going to be having a value of 10. So you can send in that way. So let us see if this is working fine. So I go back here, click home, refresh this, and now I have no parameters and one parameter. The moment I click on 1, you can see 10 is automatically taken into A and B is not available yet. Similarly, if I go home and refresh this, of course this needs to be modified. This is a typo, and currently this actually goes to still one parameter. It works fine even with our ui-sref. So this needs to be modified to one parameter. Okay, so this is a typical way on how we can actually configure optional values for your parameters. So which means those are optional by default. Okay, so let us take this to the next level. Now I'm going to say something like this: third message to. So this is going to be different state, and of course I'm going to have B as well. So here the most important thing is that goes here if both are provided. So if your route URL has both of the values, then actually it goes to this state. If your route has got one or no parameters, it is going to go to this route. So this is pretty important. So this is optional. However, it doesn't mean that this is optional in this scenario. This is not optional at all. So in this case, only colon B is optional, but not colon A. So if you provide some value to colon B, thinking that colon A is actually optional, not really, it actually goes back here. So that is pretty important. So let us test this one too. So I go back here, and okay, I need to modify my markup. So I'm going to say with 2 parameters, and I'm going to send a couple more parameters to this one, and similarly I'm going to have 2 parameters here, and I'm going to send 20 as well. So I go back here, go home, refresh this, and now you can see I have 2 parameters. So if I click on there, it is actually getting both values with the same route, and with no parameters and with 1 parameter. So same route with no values and 1 value and 2 values are automatically being configured and accomplished as part of your state configuration. So similarly, let me refresh this. It should work in the same fashion for even ui-sref. So no parameters, 1 parameter and 2 parameters. So the third one is missing because this is supposed to be message 2. So because the name of my state is actually modified to third message 2, so I need to provide that here. So in order to take that into the consideration. So I go home here, I refresh this, and the moment I click on message 2, now it should work with no issues, and even for 1 and even with none as well. And no parameter is not working. It actually tries to merge the existing state with the previous state, and if it has already got those values, it is going to display those values. So to be very clear and to be very explicit, saying that you are not sending any values, it is just another way of sending something like this: A with null and B with null as well. So in that way you're specifying that you are not really sending any values to any of those. So let us still see if it is working. So I go with 2 parameters, it is working fine, 1 parameter working fine, and no parameters working fine too. So this is just another way of doing things. So sometimes that may not work based on how you are trying to navigate, because it tries to merge the existing state with the new state, and if it has already got those values in the previous state, those values will be reused as part of the Angular UI router design itself. So if you are coming across those kind of scenarios, it is pretty important that you nullify those parameters individually. And sometimes it can also work in a different way using this. So that is ui-sref options. So in the options, whenever you specify inherit to false, it clearly says that you do not really merge based on existing states. You might be already having it. So let us see if this is working. So I go back here and refresh this, and let us go to the 2 parameters, 1 parameter and no parameter. Now it is working fine. So in order to consider this, you should really be aware that you are not really trying to merge with the existing state. If you still need merging, then you would not need this one to be provided. However, you will be nullifying explicitly using the way I have shown right here. Okay, so this is pretty much about on how you can really have your optional parameters to be specified. So let us take this to the next level, that is using the params. So let me create another state, and this time I would like to have fourth message. And in the fourth message, I do not want to provide anything in the URL, so I just wanted to keep it with no parameters there. So still I am going to work with the same template, same controller. However, I would like to introduce something new called params. So this is just another way to actually provide the values or specifying your parameters, names and values together, and also some defaults if necessary. So in this case, I can specify a as a new parameter with a default value as 1. I can provide something like this. So similarly, I can also say I would like to have another parameter called b, and the default value of this one is going to be 2. So this is just another way of providing the parameters. But there is one important thing. As you did not specify anything in the URL, this is not going to work as part of your href. So if you would like to have this one to be working, you have to use through your ui-sref alone. So let us see how you can really make use of these parameters. So I go back here into the A01. So let us start with another thing called fourth message, as I mentioned here. So I just take this fourth message here. I go in here and I'm going to say something like 20 and 30 as usual, and this is going to be message 4, and that's also with 2 parameters, which should be fine. So I go in here and get the fourth message. So this is the name of the state. I'm going to use that here, and I'm going to send the values 20 and even 30 here. Okay, so this is going to be message 4 and 2 parameters. Yes, so let us see what is working and what is not. So I go back here, let us go home and refresh this, and once I refresh this, you can see I'm having this. I go in here and it still says no route available. But if you go back to our JavaScript and see, you have the route and you have specified the parameters. The only thing is that this routing URL do not have the specification of the respective routing parameters here, and thus this one cannot be used as part of routing URL. So this is not going to work. However, this is going to work if and only if you are actually using ui-sref. That is important. So if you would like to work with only ui-sref but not really with href, but still you would like to have the parameters, then this is the way to go. So let us see if this one is working. So I go in here. So the URL doesn't have the values 20 and 30, but still it is smart enough to figure out A and B directly from the state whatever you configured. So let me go to the inspect of this one. You can see even in the inspect, even though you are providing fourth message with the object with the respective parameter names and values, the href is still without the parameter names or values. So it is just a plain routing URL, but internally AngularJS mechanism works to really work with states whatever you already configured earlier. Okay, I did not actually demonstrate the default values of 1 and 2, so let me demonstrate those as well. So I go back here. So as part of this, it is already having 2 parameters. So now I am going to say I am providing only the value of b, and I am going to say this only one parameter. So, and at the same time I do not want to send anything. But whenever you are not providing anything, as I mentioned, let us be explicit. So I am going to say the value of a is going to be null, and in this case a is going to have the value of 30 but b is going to be null, and this is also one parameter, and the 2 for the value of b, and this is one parameter and the 2 for the value of a. and at the same time I would like to have one more link with literally no values for both A and B. So let us see on how this is working. So I go back here, I go home, refresh this, and we are going to see ton of things here. So the first thing is that, okay, this is different. The last one is supposed to be no parameters. So I go back here, press refresh, and now let us see how this is working. So we are still on message 4. Now I am trying to provide the value for B, and B value is taken with 30. However, as you did not provide A, the default value of 1 is automatically taken from your configuration. So you provided B, and as you did not provide A, the value of 1 is taken by default. So these are actually the default values. So if you are not providing the values, these values will be automatically taken into the consideration for the respective parameters. So again I go back here, and now I click on parameter this one, and you can see you provided A and you did not provide B, and thus it has taken the default value 2. Similarly, if you did not provide any other value, then you can see it is actually taking the defaults of A and B respectively. So that is how you can actually configure the defaults using the params object. Okay, so let us take this to the next level by actually adding the same configuration but with colon A and colon B right here. So I am going to say this is going to be 5th message. So just want it to be pretty clear on what we are trying to accomplish here. So this is going to be 5th message, and I am going to say it is still supposed to work with 1 and 1, and however I would like to have both of these values to be still provided, so which means as part of URL. So what I'm saying is that yes, A and B values can still be provided as part of the routing URL. So let us see what's going on. And now I remove this, and defaults are still defaults no matter what. So I go back to our A, and just like 4th message, I am going to have the 5th message. So I am going to have the 5th message. So let me remove everything here. So this is 5th message, and that too with no parameters. And now I'm going to create another for ui-sref, and this is going to be 5th message too. This is 5th message, and let us send nothing to the 5th message. So this is message 5 and with no parameters. So let us see what's going on. So I go back to my application, I press home, refresh it, and now we should be able to see message 5 with no parameters and message 5 with no parameters. And if you see properly, the moment I click on this, it knows that it has to automatically translate our particular URL with 1 and 2 defaults because you did not provide the values. So if you go to inspect, you can see I did not provide A and B values, and UI router is actually smart enough to actually create a new href attribute for our anchor tag in such a way that it actually goes to the 5th message with the default values 1 and 2. So this worked with no issues at all. So let us go to this one. I click on this, and now it says no route available. But that is not how it is supposed to work. I am saying that I am providing the default values as part of my state configuration. So you can see in my 5th message I provided the defaults, but even though I am not providing the values of these two, the href routing URL is not working if no values are provided. So let us fix that. The easiest fix in this case is a slash at the very end. So imagine I just have only one slash at the moment. So I go home, I just refresh this, and the moment I click on this, you can see there is a slash here. So whether or not you have the slash at the end, it still behaves in the same fashion. But if you provide another slash, it is going to work mysteriously. So I go home here, refresh this, and the moment I click on this one, now you can see it is working with the default values. That is a strange way on how it has been defined. And in order to overcome this one, that is where we have the squash. So we are going to get to that squash pretty soon, but just wanted to let you know, if you are trying to use the params object for providing the default values and also use those parameter names as part of your URL, then the trailing slash is always necessary in order to differentiate the difference between your routing URL and the default parameters as well. So the trailing slash is essential. Again, so let us modify with one parameter now. So that is one value. So now we go back here. In the fifth message, I'm going to say just 5, and with no trailing slash here, no slash at the end, and I'm going to say this one as one parameter. So this is going to work, no issue. So I'm not going to concentrate on this one, but this one is important. So I'm saying that now it is going to be only one value 5, which is supposed to be automatically taken into A according to my configuration, and B is supposed to be taken as 2. That is the default. So let us see if this is working fine. So I have message 5 with one parameter, and I click, and again it says no route available. So even though we configured the default values, it doesn't accept it. But again, if I put a slash here, it is going to work fine with no issues. So I go home, refresh this, and if I click on this, now you can see the value 5 is automatically taken into A, and B is coming up with its own default value. So this trailing slash is going to be making huge difference whenever you are configuring the parameters as default values and trying to use those values or parameters as part of your URL as well. So that is pretty important to consider. Okay, slashes only in routing URL. So that is one thing we would like to worry about. Okay, so now let me try to create another state saying that this is going to be 6th message, and all the default values as usual. However, I am going to introduce a new property called as squash true, and this one also squash to true. So let us see how it works. So I go back to A01. I just copy and paste the same two previous links. I call this one as 6th message and 6th message, and I'm going to call this one as message 6 and message 6. But now the only difference is that I'm going to remove these trailing trailing slashes. So once I remove those, I go back here, and now I go home and refresh this, and now I have this one. See, now it works even without a slash at the very end, and even with the one parameter you can see there is no and at the very last, but still it works by taking A in the proper way and B with the default value. So this squash is going to really be working very good whenever you'd like to remove the trailing slashes in this scenario. So this squash, as I mentioned in my previous presentation here, so the squash actually represents how the default values in the URL are supposed to behave when they are the same as the current value. So let us think about this squash in a different way. So let me create another state. So I am going to call this one as 7th message. And now instead of squash equal to true, I'm going to say something like squash equal to hyphen here, and similarly squash equal to some tilde character. So what does this mean? So I am saying that whenever this particular URL or the routing URL receives dash as a value for A, please take the default value as 1 instead of dash. Similarly, you can provide tilde character for B in order to take 2 into the consideration. So let us see how it works. So I go back here, and that is the 7th message. So I go in here. Let me create a couple more. or just one. So in this case I just wanted to call this one as 7th message, and I'm going to say the first one is going to be dash, which is nothing but the value of A, and next the value of B. So in this case the value of B I would like to take it as 30, and this is going to be 7, and I'm going to say 2 parameters, and A is squashed. So the moment I have that, so let me go home and refresh this, and once I click on this, you can see the value of A is supposed to be the dash or hyphen, but this has been automatically translated to the default value 1, and B is as usual working with no issues. So let me modify this with another link, and I want to call this one as something like 24 variable A, however tilde character for B, which is nothing but we are squashing the B. So I do this, I go here, I go home, refresh this, and now I have message 2 parameters with the B being squashed. And now you can see the B is actually provided in the form of tilde, and that has been translated into the default value, which is 2. Okay, now that we have various ways on actually working with parameters, we need to work with query parameters as well. So let us have a couple more examples. So I would like to create a new state, and I would like to call this one as 8th state, so that is 8th message, and this is going to be 8th message as well. And in this case, okay, let me clear all the parameters whatever I have in place here. Okay, so I would like to provide some query parameters here. So what I'm saying is that I'm expecting A and B to be provided. So as you know, the query string usually will have a kind of a question mark, I don't need a slash here, a kind of a question mark, and then the name of the parameter and the value immediately after that. So this is the routing URL, and I'm expecting the values of A and B to be provided as part of my routing URL. So I go back to my 8th message link here. So I'm going to say 8th message, and the 8th message, as you know, it has to work with A and B. So in this case I am going to say A value is 10, and at the same time B value is 20, and I am going to say this is message 8 with 2 parameters. And the same thing should work even with our ui-sref as well. So I go in here, and instead of 7th message, sorry, 5th message, I am going to say 8th message, and of course this has to match with whatever the state name I provided here. So I provide this too, and the 8th message, in this case I would like to have A value as 10 to be maintained and B value to be 20, and this is going to be message 8 with 2 parameters. So let us go back here, go home, refresh this. Okay, I have 2 parameters, and let us see if that is working. So now you can see it is smart enough to extract the parameter values or the query string values A and B to the scope and finally bind it to our template. So let us go home and refresh this, and let us go through our ui-sref. So the moment I click on this guy, you can see it is already made available as part of our href. So if you go and inspect this, you are going to see our particular ui-sref has already been translated into the respective routing URL with the same kind of query string parameter as specified and configured as part of your state. And these query parameters would work based on your values you provide. So for example, if I'm not providing both values, so imagine I'm just providing only 10, and this is one parameter, and similarly with no parameters at all. So I'm going to remove this one too, and this one is no parameter. And similarly I would like to have even the srefs as well. So this is going to be, the first value is 10, the second value is going to be null. And let us be specific even for the next one as well. And this is going to be one parameter, and this is going to be no parameters. So I go back here and go home and press refresh, and let us click on message one parameter. You can see only A is considered and B is taken off into the consideration. And similarly, no parameters, it doesn't work. Similarly, one parameter, you have the one value, and even from the ui-sref, no parameter gives us no values. So it still works, which means those are optional by default as part of your configuration. So whether or not you provide A and B values, those are optional. So how about providing default values for those parameters? Again, you are going to go with the parameters. So I am going to create one more state and demonstrate that one too. So I am going to say this one as ninth message. And this is going to be ninth message as well. So I'm going to leave this one as usual. And however, I'm going to work with params, as because I would like to provide some default values to this one, and I can also define the characteristics of those particular parameters. So in this case, I would like to say a value has to be defaulted to 1. So let us see if this is working fine. So let me actually quickly comment all of this so that we'll be concentrating on whatever is really necessary for us. So now I need to work with the ninth message. So I'm going to have the same kind of ninth message, whatever I have in place. So this is going to be ninth message as well. This is going to be ninth message, and 9. And this is going to be 9, and this is going to be 9 too. Okay, so I'm trying to send all the parameters, 2 parameters, 1 parameter, no parameters. And similarly, I would like to have even for ui-sref. So I copy all of this, and let me get the name of the state, use the same state here, and I'm going to call this one as message 9, and message 9. So that is pretty much it. So let me go here and refresh this, and we should be able to see only the 9s. I go with 2 parameters, and now you can see 10 and 20. Of course, as you provided, those have been taken. So one parameter, that is 10, and B, there's no value because the default value is provided only for A but not B. So if I go to the no parameters, now you can see A is taken as 1 and B is not. And in the same fashion, we should be having our ui-sref parameters to be also working with 1, 2, and even no parameters as well. Okay, so this is pretty much on how you can provide the default values for your query string parameters. And the last one is going to be an array support. So how can I provide array? So let us actually modify this a bit. The specification of B is something like array equals to true. So whenever I say this, the UI router considers that whatever the values you provide with the name B, which means with the parameter name B, will always be actually presented in the form of an array. So B is going to be an array by default. So let us see how this one works. So I would like to have more values to be provided to B along with whatever we already have in place. So I am going to say, so not this one. So let me get this guy. So the B is already there. So I'm going to add one more. So that is B with another value 30 and probably B with another value 40. So I'm sending 3 values for B, and I'm going to call message 9 with multiple or probably array. That is easy. Okay, so similarly I would like to use the same thing here as well. So B value is 20, and instead of sending multiple B's here, you will be sending array. So that is important whenever you are trying to send as part of your sref. So I'm going to say 20, 30, 40, and this is array. So let us see how this is working. So I go back here, I go home and press refresh, and the moment I click on this guy, you can see the value of A is actually 10 as expected, and all the values of B are actually put inside one particular array, and it is nothing but a string array in this case, and B contains the string array basically. And even if you go to your ui-sref, it is going to be the same thing, and you can observe that as part of your inspect. Even in the inspect, you can see B value is actually considered as 20, 30, 40 being sent in the form of routing URL. So if you'd like to see whether it is really an array or not, you can just put a debugger in your scope right before your B and see how it is really working. So I go refresh here, and the moment I click on this guy, it is supposed to stop there. And let us see in the state parameters. So I just open state parameters here, and the moment you open it, you can see I have A and B. B is actually treated as an array with 3 values 0, 1 and 2 respectively. So these are all the various ways on how you can really work with UI router related parameters.